New York City. The city that never sleeps. The Big Apple. New York City. We love you. There's no place like New York City. I just want to say that. There's so much noise and honking of horns. I see why you don't ever sleep. Things stay open so late. They never close. You can always go to the bodega. They're going to be open. They're going to have a stand where you can get elotes, corn. The many different languages and cultures and foods. New York City. You're the living, breathing United Nations of the entire world. Anybody from some country on this planet has either visited or lives in New York City. Oh, you don't think you could find a Pakistani person? Come to New York City. There's many. Croatian. You can't find any Croatians except for New York City. Ethiopians. Oh my goodness. Injera, New York City. You can find it. I think that's the appeal of New York City. That is the Empire State. It's something that everybody can come to. There's so much differences. But at the end of the day, you have a New York accent. You have New York cultures and values. You don't sleep. You're the Big Apple. You have tiny apartments that you charge a fortune to live in. But people like tiny spaces. They like their local bodega. It's something about New York. Even the graffiti is different. Out west, we use the big bubble alphabet letters. New York, you're still on the street. Very limited. But you can see it. It's just different. And different doesn't mean bad or good. I prefer the West Coast. New York City. You got flavor. You got style. You got pizzazz. You got it all here in New York City. I know what you're going to hear. The rebuttal. The response. Because I started with the positive before I get to the negative. You know, it really depends on your outlook and perspective. New York, people don't remember that it wasn't always this way. You couldn't have an Asian restaurant in the same community as an Ethiopian restaurant. That was unheard of. Unconscionable. But now it's commonplace. in New York City. Nobody bats an eyelash about it. You forget New York City. They argued about which immigrants were more immigrant. They brutally and savagely fought about that. And now, New York City, you got disco lounges, local Starbucks cafes. I think you fuckers might have more Starbucks cafes than we do. And we're the home of Starbucks. And you have Dunkin' Donuts too, which we don't. I miss Dunkin'. New York, you gotta think a lot has changed for the good. So when certain individuals lead with the negative, you know they have a motive to do so, is what I'm saying. Because what do you hear now in the news about New York City? It's crime ridden. But actually, crime is actually down in New York City. And it's been trending down for decades. Yes, it took a spike during COVID. But it's actually trending down year over year. I know for sure it definitely won't go back to the way it was. But New York, we have to be cautious about something. Not resting on our laurels. You know, I think when people go to New York and live in New York City, they tend to forget about, well, the average person. I'm not saying they're mean or bad people. No, don't get me wrong. They probably agree with everything I'm saying. But when you're not directly impacted by something, you don't feel the urgency to maybe more or less do something about it. New York City has a huge homeless youth crisis. You see it on the public transportation lines when you ride them. People sleep on the public transportation lines. Youth, because they don't have a place to sleep, a roof to go. There's no resources. Not enough for the demand that's needed. So when conservatives always say that people want to spend more on social programs, well, you end up spending on programs. They just would prefer to spend it with the police departments instead of with the social service. That's the difference. You're going to spend the money. You spend a lot of money in New York City incarcerating a lot of youth for lots of different crimes. Sometimes petty, sometimes more serious. But a lot of youth end up in prison systems in New York City. Why, when there's so much opportunity in New York City, especially now? Because of income inequality, that's why. You see, for generations, certain individuals have been locked out of wealth in this country. Now, a lot of people who immigrated to New York immigrated long after slavery was over in the United States. And they'll point to this and say, that's why we shouldn't do reparations. because I didn't personally have any responsibility. But what they failed to leave out in this is whether you had any culpability or not. The individuals that experienced it still did. And they're the ones being impacted, not you. New York City, you're a city of Frank talk. Frank Sinatra. Start spreading the news. New York City, start spreading the news. In order to repair the nation, we've got to do reparations. And we've got to do it now. You go and you look outside. New York City has a huge unhoused population. People want to talk about the drug usage, the garbage, the crime that's associated with it. But what they don't want to talk about is the racial inequality, the racial inequity associated that led to that. We all know that the African American community was locked out of wealth in this country. Whether you were here before slavery or after, you know this. And everyone has benefited since then off of the labor and capital that the African American community built into the country. It's just that simple. You attended an Ivy League university. Well, that was free labor. Those universities were built by somebody. And they certainly weren't you, because you said you got here after slavery. But you've attended them. You see how the affirmative action in abolishing it makes no sense whatsoever. New York City, you got to get this done ASAP. People are starving outside. They're freezing in the cold. And people say, oh, well, it's the politicians' fault. No. The politicians come from you, the people. You're also voting in bad representatives, along with some good ones. But if you want something done, you gotta clean the house. You just can't clean one room and say your apartment is clean. People want to focus on their community. If you have a good community, then go next door to the community that's awful and fix that one up. You know, we have a congressional midterm election. It means that the elections are more decentralized. It's on your local level. Local elected officials are up. If you have a good congressperson, they're doing a good job representing you and your values and your community. Go help out in another district, another state. Share why your philosophy, your ideology, your district, your community is nice and wonderful, and why this one is not doing so well. Because I guarantee you, in most of these very extreme conservative communities, the citizenry is not doing well. That's why they have to feed red meat and racism and bigotry. Because they have to distract people from their absence, what they're doing and not doing for them. So it's easy to demagogue and say, oh, social programs, that's where all your money is going to. And they're not working. Look at the results. But you have to think, in what proportion of the total funding goes to those programs? Not very much at all. It's the old trick. Look at the big number, not how the big number is divvied up. A perfect example of this was in 2020. The Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP money, for small businesses. That's how they sold it, mom and pops. The first round of funding, no money went to minority small businesses. None. Giant institutions, basketball teams, hotel and casinos, they received money. But the small mom and pop, communities of color, small businesses, received nothing. It was so shameful. They had to do another round. And they still didn't get anything. The only institution of color that got money during the Trump administration, an increase in funding, was historically black colleges and universities. But you see now the white racist resentment towards that fact. As soon as it's revealed that HBCUs receive funding from the government, they started receiving bomb threats. Don't you find that a little coincidental, timing-wise? This shit always happens, the resentment, when you start talking about equity. When you start mentioning that of $116 trillion in gross domestic product and real wage earnings of Americans, only 3.8% belong to African Americans. It starts to get concerning when you have stats and statistics that are that blatant, unequal. So you can't talk about that. You have to distract. Now anybody that wants to fix the problem in New York City, you're labeled an anarchist, a communist, a socialist. Never mind that you want to address the issue, which is gross income inequality, gross wealth distribution. No, none of that. We get the ad hominem attacks. And you know who they come from, conservatives. And we already told you what conservatism really means. Conserving their wealth. Can you imagine this? A pie, 2 children, a pie, a pumpkin pie. You cut 10 slices, and one child eats 9, and wants to complain that the other child gets to have a piece, wants to eat all 10. $116 trillion. That's how much wealth Americans own. And only 3.8% of that is the African American community's portion. You don't think that something is grossly imbalanced with that? Conservatives don't. Oh no, they despise the word reparations. They come up with excuses even if they agree with it. How will it be done? I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. But you do. This nation paid restitution and reparations to the survivors of the internment camp in Japan. In this nation, you set up and demanded that Europe and Germany pay restitution for the Holocaust survivors. You paid reparations to the owners of the enslaved in Baltimore, Lincoln, in 1864. So don't say you don't know how to do this, because on multiple occasions we provided foreign aid to whole entire nations for decades. This is a lack of willingness to do something we know we have to do in New York City. We've got roadblocks now. We call them obstructionists. And the biggest obstructionists come from states that did the most damage, wouldn't you know? States that the federal government still doesn't fully and completely trust. And now you see why. You loosen up restrictions just a little bit on the voting rights law. And then, well, Texas wants to suppress. Florida wants to suppress. Arkansas wants to suppress. See what I mean? New York City. You gotta close the deal out. You got a good mayor now. You know how I can tell he's a good mayor? I'm not gonna always agree with somebody 100% of the time. And I won't with Eric Adams. But I can tell he's a good mayor because he's flexible. He's like, let's do this. Let's change the food program in the schools. Make it vegan. Or give kids an option to have vegan options. Let's experiment with virtual assets and currency. That's what innovators do. They experiment. They test things out. Not everything you test out will work. But if you don't test it out, you'll never know. Conservatives fundamentally don't believe in testing new things out. Everything should always stay the same. We can't do reparations. We don't know what it would do to the nation. Is that really your argument? Let millions of Americans starve. They've been holding up the black farmers' money for decades now in the court system. The courts awarded the money. But this nation can't disperse it because of racists clogging up the courts. But then you say that this has nothing to do with race. But it looks like it does. It looks like you're not on Team America. Because certain Americans, you don't want to have anything. Because you think you want to have everything. That's not Team America. That's Team you. And greed. Selfishness. The good news is New York City. You're the Empire State. And you've always had visionaries and fighters. You've got the people in place. NYC is always going to be A-OK. Because you got AOC. So I know you got the people. You got the spirit and will to do it. But power, real power, is not vested in the elected officials because they come from the community. Real power is vested in the citizenry, in the people. They don't want you to know that because then you would exercise it. New York City. Tonight, the Purple People's House is proud to endorse an idea. At some point this month, the entire African American community in the state of New York should pull their money out of every financial institution and put it into Amalgamated Bank. Amalgamated Bank is the only bank in the United States of America that's union owned. They're about doing good so you can do better. Almost 100 years ago, Amalgamated Bank was founded by a unionist worker. And now, I'm in New York City tonight telling you to pull all your money out of Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs. Pull it all out and put it in Amalgamated Bank. You know why? Amalgamated Bank is the first bank in America to fully support H.R. 40, reparations. They're on America's team, so Americans have to be on their team. I fully endorse Amalgamated Bank, fully, to show that I endorse. I'm going to put my assets where I speak. They're publicly traded as a stock. Those of you who play in that game, in that arena, fund businesses, companies that support repairing this nation. I'm going to fund Amalgamated Bank through stock. Many others will follow this lead when they learn that we're nothing to play with, New York City. Winter is here, New York City. You gotta pick up a good book to read this winter. New York City, we gotta close out the deal. We all know we gotta close out the deal. This is a good deal. This is a really good deal for everybody. It's not about shaming or blaming anybody. It's about repairing. When you repair, You don't care about the previous person and the conditions they left something in. You know it's in need of repair. And you start formulating a process, the materials, the style, the texture, how you want to repair it, how you want to restore it. Maybe some people prefer the word restoration, restoration of the nation. But I prefer repair, because the nation was never fully healed. So you can't restore something that was never healed. You gotta repair it. And this is a tool. It's a tool. We live in a financial and capitalist system. You gotta use the people, the institutions, the foundation of people who support you. Amalgamated Bank supports what we're doing on this tour. And that's why I'm going to support them. I hope their stock shoots up to the moon tomorrow. And I don't even have any investment in it yet. I'm the American heartbreak, the rock on which freedom stumped his toe. The great mistake that Jamestown made long ago. Langston Hughes. American Heartbreak, 1619. We need to repair the nation. You gotta think long term. Big picture here. It can't just be about you in Oklahoma, upset that the government is finally doing the right thing. It can't be about jealousy or envy. You gotta think about the nation. You gotta think about the youth and what you want the country to look like tomorrow. If you want it to look tomorrow like it does today, then don't do reparations. But you won't be able to repair nor restore this nation. If you want to restore and repair the nation, join me, Amalgamated Bank, Nicole Hannah-Jones, the greatest American journalist, and perhaps all of American history. No other singular American has ever fully documented the historical significance of what occurred. This is groundbreaking. Americans, New York City, the Empire State, the land of the free, the home of the brave. We've got to stand up now. You've got the government. You've got Congress. You've got the Senate. You've got the White House. We've got to do the right thing. Like Spike Lee, let's do the right thing. New York City, we love you. You're greedy. They're like gangs all over New York City. I'm like gangs of New York. Of course. New York has always been rough and gritty. But now you're gonna get it done for the nation. You watch. New York City. Amalgamated Bank. You're gonna see fireworks in New York City.